people only talk.
The first cargo of African slaves came to Trinidad in 1702. Some of these slaves were put to work on the cocoa fields in San Jose. They actually replaced the Amerindians, who either died at the hands of man or disease. In 1797, when the British got to San Jose, now referred to as St. Joseph, there were 13 sugar mills, 7 coffee mills, 4 cotton mills, and 2 rum distilleries. At that time, there were 728 people living there. 142 were white, 177 were free blacks and people of color, and 409 were slaves. By 1881, there were 1,814 people living in St. Joseph. And even though it was considered a town at the time, villages like Tunapuna, Aruca, and Princestown had way more people than that. By 1981, the population rose to 4,500. It would see a steady increase, and the 2011 census put the population at 8,001. Unconfirmed records, though, state that around 14,000 people currently call St. Joseph home. St. Joseph would prove to be the site of a monumental event and a slave by the name of Daga, who by some accounts called himself an African chief, and by others a slave trader who sold captured Africans to Portuguese slave traders while he lived in Guinea. Some accounts even say that his trade was what led to his capture. He was invited onto a slave ship for one reason or another. Hey, come and see this, and never got back off. Daga would forever be remembered for his act of defiance. It was on June 18, 1837 at 3 a.m. that Daga, along with a team of recruits, started a rebellion against the 3rd West Indian Regiment. They seized the garrison opposite Barrack Square, set it on fire, and were on their way to Arima when they were held. Daga's inexperience and lack of tactical ability showed through, and his exploits, while brave, were unsuccessful. Daga and his men were captured and later executed at George Earl Park. Despite that, many see that moment as the first blow for black freedom here in Trinidad. Many years later, in 1937, during excavations to build St. Joseph's Convent, St. Joseph, the remains of Daga and his 3 companions were discovered. St. Joseph has always been important to the fabric of Trinidad. Another first to happen in this laid-back town was that the St. Joseph police station received the first telegraph in 1870 from Governor Arthur Gordon. That was a huge step in communication services in this country. 6 years later, in 1876, residents would watch as the first railway trains passed through to launch the first railway service in Trinidad. St. Joseph went on to develop in much the same way that it started, with the major institutions like schools and churches heavily concentrated around the square. The St. Joseph Roman Catholic Church, built in 1815, was actually built on the same site as the one De Vera built back in 1592 when he was setting up the town. To this day, many of the streets share the same names with those in Port of Spain. From one capital to another, Abercrombie, Charlotte, London, Nelson, and Richmond, highlighting the British influence and maybe even a slight lack of creativity on their parts. Much of what was once a part of St. Joseph has been moved to Curep. The post office, which came to St. Joseph in 1851, the day the postal service began, has moved to Curep along with St. Joseph EC School. Despite the fact that the influence of St. Joseph continued to lessen as time went by, St. Joseph will always remain an important part of our history and one of those memorable social studies lessons that every Trinbagonian child is given. The first capital of Trinidad was St. Joseph. There's so much to learn about the development of Trinidad and Tobago, and hopefully this episode has whet your appetite and made you hungry for more info on how places like St. Joseph came about.
'Cause this is your land, just as well as my land. This is your place, and also it's my place. Till we put our heads together and live like one happy family. Democratically, educationally, we live independently.